If you're a reader of 71 Republic, you better know who Cody Wilson is. He's been named by Wired one of the top 10 most dangerous people in the world. He's infamous for creating a 3D printable gun, and he's been all over the news lately for making us freer than we've ever been before. But that's not how the mainstream media sees it. Now, we're here to interview Cody Wilson today and ask him some questions about his ideology, about what inspired him to do this type of stuff, and essentially what the future holds for him. So, Cody, you would consider yourself a libertarian, right?
Absolutely, in the
Awesome.
most thorough American sense.
What does it mean to be a libertarian to you?
In general terms, like I think of like the older Republican sense of it. It means to be a kind of Republican liberal. The idea is that the state should have minimal interface in your life, and that where there are laws, that they're only there to guarantee your personal liberties. And of course, that liberty and securing liberty is the greatest interest of civilization, the highest purpose of law and order, and that human civilization is organized for the benefit and the flourishing of the individual and his radical conscience.
Awesome. Okay, so you've discussed something called crypto anarchy a few times. Can you describe what that is?
I can. Yes, in fact.
Perfect.
Crypto anarchy it's a discourse, really. These days it's a set of practices on the internet, but it comes from a specific discourse. Timothy May is often credited as originating it in his Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. A very brief, a brief explanation of a virtual implementation of anarchy through the use of the budding internet and the personal computer, and advancements in the field of mathematics called cryptography. As cryptography developed and strong encryption became evident on the horizon, a number of these personal computer radicals of the 1980s recognized that there would be phenomena like WikiLeaks, secure channels of information that would undermine the traditional controls of information that the state had kind of afforded itself in the Westphalian terms or something, and that at least if we couldn't implement anarchy in reality, that there would be virtual implementations afforded in cyberspace. And rather than being a utopian politics, this was a technological politics which predicted Bitcoin and other types of radical phenomena, which today, are part of our daily lives.
Right. So, would you say that no government anarchy would be the end goal of your libertarian philosophy?
I'd add maybe some some subtlety here, that anarchy isn't kind of a destination in this state of affairs, like the hegemonic phase of like the Pax Americana, right? That anarchy is a set of practices. It's a hygiene rather than like a final state of affairs, like in the Marxist sense.
Okay. So this kind of ties into the idea of agorism, right?
I think so, in that your libertarian disposition should be one of undermining the state constantly, finding routes around it, developing free spheres of action outside of it. I think this is a healthy attitude to develop and a healthy way to orient your practice as a libertarian. So sure.
Got it.
Although we don't call it agorism. To us, agorism is heavily laden with a certain kind of its own baggage, culturally speaking. So you know how it is. People get real testy about terms that they use. I don't see myself as an agorist.
Okay.
But I may be one.
Right. Okay. What actually brought you to the idea of a 3D printable gun?
Pretty simple, really. Before I had the language of crypto anarchy and all this, like the late Baudrillard and all that thought, like my intuition was, of course I was libertarian. I was a college student. I was heading to law school. And I recognized that the most important thing happening in the world at that time was WikiLeaks. 2010, 2011. I mean, that was the show. And a lot of people didn't have, they couldn't formulate words or discourse around it yet. Like, what is this? What are we seeing? And I was one of those people. I'm like, I know that what I'm seeing is important. I know that this is the continuation of politics by other means, but it's by a means totally deemed outside of what's acceptable in politics, right? Like the polite game of nation states was being just constantly undermined by expelling this stuff into the domain, the public domain. I recognized if there could be, like I knew the elements. There's the internet, and there's this one man, and he's contradicting everything through technological means. And of course, then there was the Cablegate and the Bitcoin element. And I recognized, wow, there's just no way to stop something like this. Could there be something like WikiLeaks for guns? And that was probably the only idea I've ever really had, my own original idea, and the only idea that really has propelled me into this moment, continuing to be faithful and have fidelity to the idea of WikiLeaks for guns.
Awesome. Well, that ties really well into our next question, which are, what are some of your inspirations?
Sure, Assange. I've met Assange in the embassy. In fact, I'm very proud that I was able to do that, have the time to do that. Of course, now it's very difficult for me to travel to the UK, but of course, no more difficult for Mr. Assange to make his travel plans. Of course, we hear that he'll be expelled any time. You know, I'm inspired by Mr. Snowden, but I had largely accomplished a lot of our project by the time that I'd met or seen people like Edward Snowden or Ross Ulbricht. You know, we knew about the Dread Pirate at the time, and he's, I would say, an inspiration. He was this great figure in 2011, 2012, when people were just beginning to discover Bitcoin. One of my inspirations is a good friend of mine. His name's Amir Taki. He's a radical, and he was good at introducing me to many of like the concert of radical Europe, all the crazy pockets of crypto-anarchists and radical communists and digital libertarians doing like the important work of technical and political development in Europe and to some degree Asia. Amir's also been quite a fighter for the popular revolution in Syria as of late, and I'm inspired by his commitment to, I don't know, the nostalgic idea of history. But really, a lot of my inspiration comes off the page. And I'm still inspired by thinkers like Carl Schmitt and Jean Baudrillard, who I consider to be my primary inspiration in how I conduct our work here at Defense Distributed.
Awesome. So you're mentioning Baudrillard, and in previous interviews you've mentioned other postmodernists like Foucault. Where do you see the postmodernist, I guess, the train of thought intersecting with libertarianism?
Well, one thing like that we can take from Baudrillard is to always be careful and to read the postmodernists most often against themselves. Never take it all too seriously, and especially never use them as spiritual contractors of the state. Deconstruction should be used to deconstruct, not to justify oppression or legacy institutions, which is almost, without exception, its use in the academy. You're not going to learn much in post-Marxist discourse at university, but I guarantee you that you can use it outside of university. And in our case, let me put the rubber to the road here, like Baudrillard says in some of his later thought, that every made object or every artistic project should be an analogy for something, or presented as a challenge to someone else. It should contain within it elements of chance and play, sometimes exhaust and waste. And he has, in his semiotic theories, a guidebook for symbolic discourse, that everything should be a symbol for something else and recognized that way. You see below you, like we cover ourselves in symbols. We constantly leave these unresolved poetics in the things that we do, and of course this affects people, I think, at a subconscious level, where they're either forced to engage us on unconscious terms that lead them to overreact, and they're pulled into fight with us like in this unconscious kind of whirlpool, vectored way. I believe most deeply in fighting in symbolic terms before actual terms.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. Hope the viewers can understand that.
Does it?
Yeah, I hope so.
But I can make this literal for you. Like the factory that you're in here, right? This is a real factory. We make a machine here. You've seen some of this. This machine is called the Ghost Gunner. Okay. Well, I didn't call it that. Accident. Ghost gun was a term developed by our enemy. Our enemy, Kevin DeLeon, there he is. I created a cardboard cutout of the man to remind me of my patron saint, the man who made us who we are. Kevin DeLeon coined that term as far as I'm concerned. This is a ghost gun. Power doesn't know what it is, right? Because we don't know what it is, it haunts us, you know? And so you can literalize this problem, right? You take this hyperbolic rhetoric that the legacy lifestyle socialists develop, you literalize it, you create a world that they didn't technically believe in, so you call their bluff in technological terms, but of course the real challenge is in the symbolic. Okay, Kevin DeLeon, now I've given you a machine which literally immanentizes the ghost gun scenario that you described, and I've also done you one better. Now there is such a thing as a ghost gunner and a ghost gun, and you are haunted, literally, and now you must create a regime of law to go find these things, or else, you know, you didn't take the world seriously. So it's always this constant process of one-upping power, challenging it to become real. This is how I describe what we did with the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department challenged us once we developed the first printed gun. It said, no, we control that. This is the primary reflex of the great power of the United States. Its first instinct is to say, but this is mine. I control this. Well, and rather than saying no, I think a better strategy, as I've learned in Baudrillard, is to say, okay, then control it. My lawsuit was mostly a challenge to the State Department to make an information control regime of controlling people's postings of digital information related to guns to the internet. It was a challenge to make that regime real. My intuition, knowing that that regime couldn't become real, is why I won. in the end. It wasn't saying, no, 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 I have rights and you can't do this to me. It was saying, fine, tell us how you control this. Tell us why and the contours of such a regime of information control. And ultimately the State Department ran away from it. Power is only the presentation of the signs of power.
Okay.
We learned this in Baudrillard as well.
Awesome. So when it comes to this stuff, like, well, what it seems like your strategy now is get them to admit that they hate the First Amendment just as much as they hate the Second.
But we know that. We know
right,
that.
right. Well, we know that now. But what's going to come out of that?
This is what's happening now. My legal case now is much more subtle. My State Department license is just over there, just at the end of the table there. Devastating thing that I got that, because now, as the postmodernists would indicate, I don't have to present myself in these conflicts as, I don't know, outside of the state or like its saboteur or something. Now, the appropriate orientation is to show that I'm an agent of the state. This is something that the agorist doesn't understand yet, right? You need theory to go beyond your pure agorism. This isn't counter-economics. This is, hey, I am the feds, and when you sue me now in federal court, you have to sue the State Department itself. This is now inviting the two powers to fight it out between themselves. And this is a whole new level of the game. This isn't just about your First or Second Amendment. This is about questions of the separation of powers.
Okay. So when these two institutions of the federal government fight it out, what happens? Like, what do you see coming from this?
Sorry, I'll make it clear. I'm being sued by 20 states in the union, right?
Sorry about that.
The little powers are suing the big power. Well, this is the kind of conflict that you want to see.
Yeah.
No matter what, there's going to be some type of product that will likely benefit the individual. At the end of the day, the federal government wins because the federal government has supremacy in this domain. But what's most interesting is because we became a contractor of the federal government through this special license, we're insulated from the attacks of these states to some degree. You have to have this level of flexibility somehow because of this challenge, and because you know that, again, this is Baudrillard, that power must absorb every function. And because it can't expel you and your activity totally, you can allow it to absorb you. And then you're thereby permanently insulated against the attacks of lesser powers. If you can stomach this understanding, you can't be defeated.
Okay. Got it.
And this is why, look, I'm not a counter economist. I'm not an agorist, right? I run a manufacturing company which is licensed by the U.S. Commerce Department, right? I pay my taxes.
Right.
Everybody here's on payroll.
Right.
Some anarchists we are.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, I always thought it was kind of interesting how it's like every time you're on TV, you're just talking about, well, we're abiding by all the laws, and I'm like.
Not only abiding by them, right, but advancing them in their scope to some degree. But you have to understand that this is, of course, like the mode. This isn't a 20th century discourse. There isn't going to be traditional power isn't going to be like, damn, you're right. We don't control this. You can only help it to over-articulate its methods of control. And this is exactly what happened with this judge in Seattle on Monday. This judge is a dyed-in-the-wool liberal who hates guns, okay? Great. And he hates the First Amendment. He shit all over it in his order. What's funny is, he still couldn't find a way to stop us. He tried as hard as he could to give the states everything they wanted in that order. But to make them put in black letter the ways that they control you, and this is some theory for you again, is to also make them put in black letter the ways that they don't control you.
Got it. And that's kind of how this whole, the selling the blueprints instead of just distributing them.
I've been ready to do that for 2 months.
Awesome.
I simply waited. I waited until I got a concrete order with all the admissions that we wanted. We got him to admit 2 or 3 of these things, and the state's attorneys to admit these things at the hearing in Pennsylvania about a month ago, in Seattle about a month ago, and then sure enough, there it was in the order. So you have to play the game at that level.
Got it. So you're selling these now. You talked about this at the press conference yesterday, but it's name your own price. So you could just put in $0 and just get the blueprints?
Yeah. I still get you in the end. You got to pay shipping and handling.
Okay, makes sense. so it's not a digital download. You're sending physical blueprints.
That's what we're doing right now. But of course, the judge, in all his generosity, gave us the authority to email the files as well, securely transfer them. I just don't have some of that infrastructure built. It's trickier to do it that way. But what's great is when I ran this press conference, what was it, yesterday? Was it only yesterday?
Yes, it feels
Jesus, I'm living like every day's a year. But I told the press, yeah, what's the difference? I'm allowed to email it, right? So you can go to my website, you can click a button that says download. The judge says I can't do that. Okay, now you can go to my website and click a button and now the file's emailed to you. What's the difference? Look, I spend a lot of time and money on these things. And what's funny is, of course, you're going to lose at the preliminary stages of all these things, because law is, to some degree, just feeling and political expression at the district court level. You're going to catch some Clinton appointee, or God forbid a Carter appointee, or that's how it's going to be. It's this grossly political thing. And eventually you find a panel of Federalist appointed judges, Federal Society, involved, like conservative judges who somehow at least have an ethos of constitutional decision making, at least a practice of a modality of interpreting the Constitution. Eventually you get there, and then they make some kind of like outside interpretation that doesn't really give you the outcome that you want. So you need to stay out of the federal courts. I want to impress this upon anybody. Your instinct as a libertarian is right. Stay away. But when you play the game, if you're able to play it on a poetic level and understand some of the things that I'm saying here, involve yourself at the highest levels. Don't go fight City Hall. Fight them at the level of the United States munitions list and questions of extreme specificity in technology and the economic interactions of these administrative agencies. The judges don't understand it. The attorneys don't understand it. The state governments don't understand it. And then when you get outcomes like mine where they somehow think they've beaten you, no, I know the law better than literally anyone else in the room there at that point. I've built companies around understanding and complying with these laws. You have the magic of poetry to a degree. The laws are just figments. These people don't understand it any better than you do.
So this kind of ties into this idea of crypto anarchy. They don't understand the internet, and that's where you can practice anarchy.
If you understand things like the Streisand Effect, right, black swan type events, and these low probability, high risk, high outcome strategies, you're already head and shoulders above your adversary, because your adversary doesn't know what the hell is going on. Like Pennsylvania and New Jersey, right? They follow these declarations and these actions against me, where they actually show in the court record the names of their public affairs investigators and stuff. Well, I get those names. I go on the internet and I get all their personal information, and I run it against our databases and stuff. And then I find the other people in these agencies, and then I'm able to suddenly clean out the entire investigative divisions of Pennsylvania and New Jersey and insulate myself against further action from them. When they sue me in federal court, they indicate their strategy too early. And now when I begin to sell my files, I don't even avail myself of personal jurisdiction. They're slow, right? That's what they are. They're lumbering. They have to take time. They have to make decisions. They have to concretely put themselves out there. You, as a digital libertarian activist, you are quick, you are stealthy, you have celerity, you have rapid decision making, you are flexible, you are water, right? On day one, I am defeated. On day two, I begin selling the stuff anyway. You have to maintain this modality.
Okay. I'm gonna take a little bit of a switch here and get to more of a theoretical issue. So these blueprints, they're online. And as hopefully we both know, online things aren't scarce. So does intellectual property exist?
Can you hand me this patch, this white patch? I'll bring this up in a bit, maybe. Does intellectual property exist? It exists as a fiction in the law. I don't know if you want me to answer the question yet, but intellectual property exists, sure, and that it's a fiction that power takes seriously and enforces to some degree. God knows I'll have to fight all about it. The biggest consequence of my ultimate victory politically will be one of enormous challenge in intellectual property domains. Just today I was threatened by one of the oldest manufacturers of firearms in the world, Beretta, on an intellectual property claim. And of course one of the largest defense contractors in the United States also sent us some type of legal stuff related to their trademark and commerce. So intellectual property is real, and you will pay if you violate it. But of course it's not substantial, and it's not really meaningful. There's no way to enforce the contours of a regime that would somehow control what the three-dimensional, what plans for objects. Of course there's no real gatekeeping for this type of stuff. The market is liquid, it's frictionless, as you've indicated, and infinitely replicable. When we take the American motto, come and take it.
I took a picture of it.
Come and take it. When we take this motto, there's actually a perversity here which relies upon this slippage in the internet. Come and take it is no longer a direct threat. It's saying, actually, when you take it, it's infinite. You can just keep taking it. And now it's not a threat, it's an invitation. Take as many as you want.
I like that.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yeah. So do you see this as more of a First or a Second Amendment issue?
Well, if we're talking about questions of pure law and framing it in just this traditional American discourse, for me, like, the passion is for the Second Amendment. that you have a right to keep and bear arms. This is much more interesting to me than the common law right of free speech and free association. Of course, I think we owe most of our freedoms in this civilization to that English history of free speech. And that's a richer tradition. But what's more anomalous and more interesting to me is that somehow, of all the nations in the world, the United States ends up with this like actual duty to resistance and right to military-grade hardware in the founding document. It's so special. It's so unique. It's so worthy of understanding and protection, and it's this great artifact of a Republican controversy from a specific period in basically the English Republicanism, and that all these crazy Enlightenment radicals kept dealing with it in the foundation of their own nation. It's this great I don't know. If you're a geologist, it's this incredible layer, and otherwise boring layers of thousands of years of political history, where for a brief period of time the people were given something incredible. And I want, while we still have it in a substantial sense, I want to explode it, to expand it, to make it somehow permanent with the technologies that we have.
Okay. Do you see the capability to expand beyond completely 3D printing just a single-shot Liberator to some larger, more powerful guns?
I think that I do see a possibility here of a whole panoply of technologies that can afford you better ability, capability, capacity to produce real guns that you might actually care about, not just kind of curiosities that can fall off of your 3D printer. The facility that you're at today makes a digital milling machine, right? A CNC milling machine that fits on your desk, and you can finish AR-15, AR-10, 1911, Glock receivers on this device. These are guns that are real, that you care about. They're not 3D printed guns that fall apart after a few shots. They're the guns that really matter. And you can make them without a serial number because of this equipment. And they are eminently affordable. And the reason they are is because we carry on a tradition from the maker movement, the open source movements. We use open source digital controllers and computers. We use open source software for their operation. And we use cheap Chinese components and other stuff that we manufacture ourselves to make the most affordable package possible for you to do this work. So I see nothing but opportunities to make software and hardware and things that can only help you, services even. I see so many ways to cut the apple, peel the onion, whatever, give you ways to help you make firearms. And what I've done is so modest compared to what I imagined.
Got it. Okay. So towards the beginning of your book, you talk about how the first 3D printer you got, the company was like, nope, give it back. And then you go on to discuss how there was more opposition coming from the private sphere than the governmental sphere.
Yes. This continues to this day.
Right. How does it continue to this day?
Our most ferocious and successful censors and roadblocks are never like the ATF or the State Department or the government, right? The government, at the end of the day, can be hauled into court and have to apologize for doing something to you, right? But FedEx, Amazon, Facebook, Google, these groups are wholly unaccountable, and their capricious decision-making can't be challenged, can't be reversed. Silicon Valley, in general, as a monoculture of political thought, is more dangerous and more successful in, I don't know, interrupting the successful spread of our technology than any of these political institutions have ever been or could ever be. I've not been able to advertise, like our website, for example, or any of our services on Facebook, Google, eBay, right, like you name it, for many years. I'm not able to make use of the traditional payments processing technologies and service providers that you may be used to. And of course, as these begin to consolidate under aegis like Stripe and Square, it becomes more difficult to even find service providers. And of course, I've been banned on PayPal for years. Now we end up having to use technologies like Bitcoin, and we end up having to understand how to host our own stuff and develop certain sufficiencies and abilities for independence, which are necessary and vital and something that I advocate all libertarians do. But after a while, getting kicked off e-commerce platforms and getting kicked off of traditional selling marketplaces, you begin to understand that you are relegated to the margins. And there is no way for people to discover you unless you accidentally ride a wave of attention from legacy media, which would otherwise, blot you out.
Awesome. So you talk about legacy media, you mean like the modern mainstream, New York Times, CNN, all those. Mm-hmm. How do you see alternative media playing a role both in the present and the future?
You mean just in the promotion of my company, or do you just mean
or in the promotion of ideas as a whole?
Alternative media has a hill to climb, right? While we've seen the success of like the conservative blogosphere to some degree, like in the rise of Trump, and we saw all this consternation at the successes of Breitbart and Steve Bannon and all these platforms. At the same time, Facebook and these other platforms were able to effectively equalize their reach and output, and in fact penalize them through AI and all these algorithms. There are equal problems. Of course, there are successful alternative media organizations, but their fates are intermixed with caprices of large organs like Facebook and Yahoo and Google. And these companies set the agenda.
Right.
They set in a very specific way. They even announced that they will plan the public discourse to some degree or be referees of it. That's challenging, and I don't really know, if you're alternative media, how you successfully route around something like that.
Right. So I see this all kind of tying together, both the struggle you're having with these big tech companies and the struggle you mentioned alternative media having. Just recently, Alex Jones and a bunch of other libertarians and conservatives have been taken down. How do you think we're going to overcome this struggle, if at all?
Alex Jones is a good example of how to overcome it. At the end of the day, you can't rely on being, okay, I'm the most popular guy on iTunes. Well, they can take that away. You have to some degree, be in charge of building your own platform, maintaining your own reach, and controlling your own payments. And, you're on Patreon, right? Don't get too spicy, or you'll lose that. You're on YouTube. Don't get too spicy, you'll lose that. You have to understand this. And to some degree, that this affects your decision making. When you know that it does, this is the first indication that you should become the captain of your own ship a little better. You need to maintain your own platform and make sure that to some degree you have your own financial independence, so it doesn't ultimately vector the shape of your organization, the people who control the agenda in your organization, so you don't ultimately end up conforming according to the incentives that these larger players would have you, adjust to.
Right. Okay, so I got to bring it up because you talk about building your own platform, and I think you might see what's coming.
I love it when people bring it up.
You had Patreon.
I wish I still had it.
Yeah. So how did that happen? Where did that come from?
That you talk about it in the past tense is the most stinging thing about it.
Okay.
I hate that it ended the way it did, but I am proud that I carried it until the point where Visa itself terminated. It was just like WikiLeaks.
All right. So for people that don't know what Patreon is,
what was Patreon, Cody? So, in the summer of hate, the rise of the alt-right and everything, a number of these villains in alternative media that we talk about got quite successful and quite popular, gained a lot of traction in the public discourse. They had platforms on YouTube and Patreon, and they had, official platforms in media, like the Rebel.tv, and you know what I mean? They were kind of infesting the institutions. And there began to be a turn after the election of Trump to begin to push these people out of official discourse. And Patreon, the new kind of alternative to making money if you had a YouTube presence, began to enforce certain terms and conditions and kicked a number of the people on the right just completely off of the platform based on their viewpoints and advocations during the summer of hate and past then, like the migrant crisis in Europe. I recognized an opportunity through all the financial ties that we had developed and processing power that we had accumulated over the years, because of course I'm no stranger to getting kicked off of financial platforms, and it's difficult to successfully finance and process for millions of dollars in sales of untraceable gun machines. So I had developed a bit of capacity, spare capacity, you could say, and I recognized that I could provide a platform for these voices that were being immediately, kind of quickly censored. Within a few months in the summer of 2017, Patreon became one of the most popular platforms for funding alt-right voices and new right voices and extremist political parties in Europe, Eurosceptic and anti-immigration voices in different political discourses around the world. We had thousands of participants, and we processed many thousands of dollars every month to these voices. And I consider that to be a great thing and a legitimate thing that I had done, and a victory for freedom of speech in the moment. The Southern Poverty Law Center would estimate at one point the next year that I had in the year 2017, I had funded about 13% of the alt-right by myself. I'm happy that I was able to do that.
Nice. So how'd this all end?
How did it end? Well, is anything ever over? But Visa at the end discovered that we were operating, that we were accepting Visa cards through the service. And they turned it off. At the end of the day, credit card issuers are something like gods. And you've seen this in the news probably recently. Visa and MasterCard can just decide one or two people that they find objectionable, especially on hate speech, which has become the project of socialism, really, the entirety of the project. Based upon these terms, Visa can just turn you off and deny you access to the credit rails. There's really no final appeal. There's no court of credit access or credit issuance. When you lose with Visa, you lose.
Okay. So why was that the loss? Why not switch to something like crypto?
People ask that, and of course I studied it. But the real problem in crypto is that there's not a pull mechanism. Yeah, there's lightning channels and these other things which aren't quite there, but we could have experimented with. The main thing is that the reason services like Patreon work are actually features of the payments technology industry. Patreon works because you know you have a vaulted credit card authorization in a database somewhere, tokenized with a credit card issuer or a processor. And every month you can depend upon a certain amount of income. This is all built in a web application through an API. It's automated, and that's the service. There's no similar technology and automation features in Bitcoin or other crypto at the moment. There's no pull functions. So without that, you're not really giving people a service. You're giving them what? A mediated access to an email list where every month they go, hey, remember guys, you gotta send me some crypto again. And of course, the way people send crypto is a bit more, well, it's less refined, isn't it?
Yeah.
But services like this will at some point exist. It's just difficult, I think, and not really the right strategy to become a large platform for right-wing thought. You become too easy of a target. And that was an important lesson for me, because not only was I constantly challenged in the payments industry, but a service like that is just a huge victim for hackers and Antifa and everything all over the world. I learned a lot in a short amount of time about web security and how to host a website, which we've translated to some degree to our applications here today.
Awesome. So I want to bring it back to the whole guns issue, 3D guns, defense distributed, all this you got going on. How far are you actually willing to go with this?
What, printing guns or something? What's the this that we're going?
Well, just this whole idea of pushing the ultimate freedom to be armed.
Oh,
like,
all the way.
All the way?
In fact,
What's that mean?
There really isn't an end.
Okay.
Actually, there's an end to these antithetical ideas. When you say, I'm for gun control, and you're like, well, where does that end? And you go, well, we'll get a law and it says no guns. Like, that's the end, right? You have no, but what's fortunate, I should say, about our project is that there's not an end to the different technical combinations, recombinations, the imaginary, the gun producer imaginary. It's without limit.
Awesome. Would you be willing to go to jail for this right to bear arms?
Well, I hope that my actions show that I am.
Okay.
Right? I often put my ass on the line. That's really my contribution here. Sometimes I say things which are kind of cute and stick on in the media, but my real contribution is that I put skin in the game, and at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, it's my ass in jail, and that's why I get to be the guy on camera and everything. So, yeah, I think you could see that I'm definitely willing to buy the ticket and take the ride.
Awesome. So I want to take it way, way back. How did you become a libertarian?
Oh, some of these things, right, are innate to us, probably. I think it's in my personality to be one. I've always been somebody who just wants to do what I want to do. I don't really have a need to hurt anyone, but, it's never made sense to me that I'd have to listen to somebody else or follow the prerogatives of some organization or group of friends or people. I've always liked to be left to my own devices and pursue my own inquiries freely. Often I find, coming up as an adult, roadblocks to free inquiry. Not that I have a problem with authority. I suppose I can't say that with a straight face, but really as growing up, I never had a huge problem with authority. But I did take the American mythos, right, our foundational Republican revolution, like this mythos. I took it really, really seriously. Maybe that's a consequence of the fact that I grew up in the South. I grew up in Arkansas, and I feel comfortable in states like Texas. This place feels like home to me. And of course, there's no greater mise en scène for the drama of the free man than Texas, God, and its revolutionary history. I take these things to heart. When I think of the Alamo, I think of Bowie, and I think of Boone and these guys who just came down here to kick some ass. That was literally all they wanted to. They needed no better justification. They're free men. They can do whatever the hell they want. The greatest compliment that could ever be served in my life probably is if I could be included among their number in the history of American dudes.
I love that. So You talk about how you always have had this personality with you, this kind of embodiment of these ideals, but when did that make the connection to the whole intellectual side of libertarianism, the
Sure.
literature?
If you want to give me, if you want me to give you my pedigree, all of it's productivism, in the words of the postmodernism. But after a while, you begin to discover the discourses surrounding Marx and after Marx, and my discovery of Hoppe and Mises and Hayek, right? This is where I began to understand, oh, actually, I actually kind of agree more with Hayek's position in this moment, right? By the time I'm kind of like in the middle of high school. And then I began to understand, well, no, really, I like the ideas of Hoppe. And by the time I was in college, I discovered the philosophical discourse of modernity and Nietzsche, right? All the things that you end up reading in college. And then I discovered Foucault, and by the time I'm reading Foucault, though, I'm already understanding to read him against himself. Like, yeah, I understand the aims of leftism, but I understand as well that it's captured by the state and by cultural socialist interests in the present, and that the aims of leftism are largely aborted by the trappings, its cultural trappings. And so you could say, to some degree, I'm still a post-leftist. Like when I began Defense Distributed, I was still talking about mutualism and anarchist leftism and all this stuff. Those communities aren't very helpful. They're not the best advocates for their own ideas, but I believe I've taken the best of those ideas, which is that intellectual property is an impediment. Capitalist institutions are a problem.
Okay.
Neoliberalism is a real identifiable phenomenon, and it is, I don't know, the practical mode of expansionary statism. These are fundamentally leftist points of view and descriptions of the present. I maintain them, and I think they've helped me elaborate something of the American gun culture which was not present before.
Awesome. So kind of to finish up, I want to start talking about the future. Are you optimistic about it? The future for liberty, that is, and the future for yourself.
Here's the thing about me, even if I'm just like a real son of a bitch, I continue and I have a point of view, right? And that means that there's belief there. That means that like I actually think that I can affect outcomes and that the world can be, you know, even if it's a pitched battle, that I have a stake in the outcome of events. This isn't a struggle from a point of view of like what, just outright nihilism and just conflict for conflict's sake. Although I believe, like in Baudrillard, human beings have an interest in conflict. We have an interest in crisis and dread and system failure. This isn't something that's admitted in traditional libertarian theory, with its rational actor is always seeking the best outcomes. No, we have a poetic and spiritual interests in disaster. And so I'm comfortable with disaster as well. And to some degree resigned to the fact that, you know, obviously I can't create the perfect outcome that I want, but I can create a hell of a mess.
I like it. That's a good place to end. Cody, thanks for the interview.
Thank you.
Yep.
It's my pleasure.